Hi everyone, welcome back to Bad Monkey Finger Audio. This is a short comparison video between the NuForce microDAC1 and the microDAC3. So after owning a NuForce microDAC for many years, since the inception of the company really, I decided to buy a second DAC to connect to my main system. The microDAC1 was on my bedroom system initially. This decision was made after my trusty old Rotel RCD971 CD player finally gave up the ghost. I didn't want to keep using CDs any longer, so purchasing a new CD player was out of the question. I currently use a microDAC for both headphone use and as a computer output to one of my home systems. Happy enough with the microDAC1, I purchased a microDAC3. Since my microDAC1 was connected to my main system at the time, I connected the microDAC3 to my secondary system, believing both DACs sound essentially the same. I didn't notice much change, maybe slightly more clarity, but I hadn't considered that my secondary system is not full range. At the time, I also did not compare the headphone outputs of the two units, as it wasn't really on my radar. It wasn't until I later connected the microDAC3 to my main system that I really appreciated the difference between the two. So I thought I'd make a short video comparing the two of them. The microDAC3 is in fact a bit more refined than the microDAC1. The microDAC1 has exaggerated bass and upper bass and a thicker, more homogenized mid-range, and slightly less extended, coarser treble than the microDAC3. By contrast, the microDAC3 is much more spacious, three-dimensional, has more refined treble, and has much more delineated bass, with no mid-range bass bloat, making it sound leaner than the microDAC1. Now let me move on to the specifications of the two units. Both units are USB powered at 5 volts. The USB input on the microDAC1 is a USB-B input, which is much more robust than we find on the microDAC3, which is a flimsy USB micro input. I much prefer the USB-B input over the microDAC input. The microDAC inputs on these little DACs seem very, very flimsy and potentially prone to failure. So the microDAC1 wins in that regard. They're both USB 1.1 and 2.0 compatible. The microDAC1 processes between 32 and 48 kilohertz at 16-bit, whereas the microDAC3 goes up to 96 kilohertz at 24-bit processing. The RCA output voltage on both is 2 volts. The dynamic range on the microDAC1 is at 110 decibels, whereas on the microDAC3 it's only 90 decibels. The signal-to-noise ratio is better than 98 dB on the microDAC1, and it's rated at 98 dB on the microDAC3. The digital coaxial output is 75 ohms. The headphone output on both microDACs is 80 milliwatts per channel at 16 ohms. The THD plus noise on both units is rated at 0.05%. Physically, both units are exactly the same size at 68 by 38 by 21 millimeters. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the sound quality of the microDAC1 versus the microDAC3. I'm just going to give you some bullet point information that I jotted down while listening to the two and comparing the two of them. So the microDAC1 is more powerful sounding, or seemingly more powerful than the microDAC3, despite having the same rating. I'm not sure if that has to do with the volume pot or what have you, but it plays a lot louder at the same volume setting than the microDAC3 does. The microDAC1 is more full sounding. It's got a fuller sounding mid-range and upper bass. The microDAC3 is less so. microDAC1 is less resolving over the microDAC3. The microDAC3 definitely has more resolution than the microDAC1. Because of that additional resolution, that exposes the warts in the music a lot more, whereas with the microDAC1, its less resolving nature coats over the warts in the music a little bit better when necessary. But along those lines, perhaps due to the less resolving nature, there's less ambience in the microDAC1, whereas the microDAC3 has a much better sense of ambience than the microDAC1. The microDAC1 also has a narrower soundstage than the microDAC3, which is significantly wider. The soundstage in the microDAC1 is also less defined, whereas there's much more overall definition in the soundstage in the microDAC3. The microDAC3 is also much more vivid, in my opinion, where you can get a better sense of the individual performer's location in space. Whereas with the microDAC1, that's a little less vivid. It's a little less so. The microDAC1 is slightly rolled off in the upper frequencies, whereas the microDAC3 is more extended, and it also has a more refined treble than the microDAC1, whereas the microDAC1 is a little bit on the coarse side in the treble region. It's not overly coarse, mind you, but it is noticeably more coarse than the microDAC3. Also, the microDAC3 is much more three-dimensional in sound than the microDAC1, which is a lot less 3D. And this can be quite noticeable. I really noticed it on my home system when I connected the two units, when I compared the two units. The microDAC1 has a much fuller bass, although it's admittedly less defined than on the microDAC3, where with the microDAC3, the bass is seemingly leaner, but it is more accurate in nature, with much more clear delineation of bass notes than in the microDAC1. The microDAC1 also has a more densely packed performance, whereas with the microDAC3, there is clearer instrument separation and delineation. The microDAC1 is less airy and spacious, but it's not bad in that regard, don't get me wrong, but definitely the microDAC3 is much more spacious and airy sounding. The microDAC1 softens the edges of the music a little bit, to some degree anyway, whereas the microDAC3 has much more snap to the music. It's also, again, more clearly delineated than with the microDAC1. One more thing that I'd like to mention, again, although this has nothing to do with sound quality, is the fact that the microDAC1 does have the USB-B input, which is a much more robust input connector by comparison to the USB micro, which is, it's just too small and too flimsy. And in fact, the cable that came along with the microDAC3 has already worn out and falls out quite easily. So with all of that said, to sum up, with the exact same form factor and very similar specifications, selecting one of these microDACs over the other would most likely boil down to system matching. I found the microDAC1 to pair well with my more detailed and refined Philips SHP 9500S headphones. The warmer nature of the microDAC1's sound mates well with the fairly detailed Philips headphones, ever so slightly taking the edge off some of the quote-unquote rough edges of the sound. That's not to say that the microDAC3 sounds bad with the Philips. In fact, the openness and spaciousness is noticeably improved when using the microDAC3, so it would really boil down to personal taste in selecting one over the other. By contrast, the microDAC3 paired very well with my Koss KPH30Is with Grado G cushions. The Koss headphones are a fairly warm-sounding headphones, so the added openness, spaciousness, and detail of the microDAC3 complemented them very nicely. When using the warmer microDAC1 with the warmer Koss headphones, the combination may seem a little bit dark for some listeners. So in a nutshell, the microDAC3 is the superior DAC in terms of outright performance, but the microDAC1 could very well be used in systems that are currently on the leaner or cooler side of the sound spectrum, in order to give the music some added warmth and body. In my opinion, both the microDAC1 and microDAC3 are viable solutions for those people who are looking for an inexpensive bridge to higher quality sound out of their home computer, with each DAC having their own distinct characteristics. When I noticed the differences in sound quality between the two microDACs, I decided to try out some more current options as well, and so I purchased both the Topping E30 and an SMSL Sanskrit 10 version 2. So stay tuned, I'll have a couple more DAC comparisons coming soon. Not sure when, but soon. Anyways guys, thanks for watching once again, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.